I think that, thank you very much for really helping me to basically to show that the analogy should be a workable and reasonable analogy. I think the comments from this particular viewer itself is an answer to your question and an answer that the person is looking for. The comment was, again, they was saying that you are ignorant of the basic physics. So if you are ignorant of basic physics, you cannot explain the complex process since Big Bang. What I'm saying that I acknowledge that I'm not actually expert in physics, and I acknowledge my ignorance. But what this comment mean? It basically means that in order to explain the process, you have to have a knowledge. Now, if you do not have a knowledge, you cannot really explain this process. If you're ignorant of how it happened, you can't really make a comment. Very good point. I agree with that. And I'm not claiming that I'm an expert. I'm really explaining this process in detail. I'm just saying that based on what I heard from experts, and I try to simplify this and explain it. What does it mean to us as a lay person? Now, well, we know that knowledge can only come from a conscious. If you do not have a conscious, there's no knowledge. In other words, you can actually put a lot of knowledge in a small disk, but you can't say this disk is very knowledgeable, knows a lot of things. Even though the disk, let's say a flash disk, can actually carry the knowledge of 1,000 books, but it doesn't mean that actually this disk is knowledgeable, has the knowledge, or knows what is there. Knowledge, in this case, comes with conscious. Now, if understanding, explaining the process of the universe requires knowledge, and those who are ignorant, they cannot even explain it, my point is that how come this process itself can come into existence without someone who has conscious and who has knowledge? That's the point I try to make it. Basically, you cannot attribute this complex process to unconscious, ignorant, blind objects or basic elements and energy or the wind in our analogy. That's my point.
Okay. Well, here's what I think your problem is here. You are confusing the properties of the particles with knowledge. They are not the same thing. Knowledge does require a mind. I agree with you about that. But the properties of the particles does not require a mind. The properties of those particles could exist on their own, independent of any mind, and it is our minds now coming late in the game, that is 13.7 billion years after the Big Bang, that are trying to understand the nature of these properties among the particles. So your mistake in thinking here is to believe that the properties of the particles in your analogy, the sticking properties of the sand, requires some kind of invention or creation or imposition by an outside source, where the simplest explanation is that the properties just simply exist. That's just the way it is, and we're just trying to discover how it works. So I hope that clears up the confusion.
Okay, I think first of all, I appreciate that you acknowledge that knowledge require mind. So, and if there is no knowledge, there is no mind, you can't claim really there is knowledge out there. That's good. That I was afraid that we might even discuss that point. So it's good that we don't need to discuss this point. So, I agree with you. I'm not actually saying, I'm not confusing actually the property of those basic elements as kind of the knowledge owned by the element or the knowledge within the process. What I'm saying that I grant you the right to say that let's assume somehow we get those basic elements with those, sticky property, whatever we call the law of nature, which is certain basic laws. That again we will in the future discuss what the laws means as well. But my point is that once you even make this assumption and say with the Big Bang we get this basic element with certain quality, now after that there has been tremendous process of development of complex objects, because what we have seen from that simple one, the most complex being that we know as a human being, basically they are nothing other than just the arrangement of those basic elements came out of Big Bang. So now, since we kind of consider those basic elements like a grain of sand, or in your case maybe 100 type of grain of sand, so the whole issue is that once we look at those billions of billions, or perhaps infinite, almost infinite number of complex objects around us, then what we see, we try to understand where they came from, how they gained this complex structure. Now, my explanation, I was saying that when you really look at from the Big Bang to now, at this time, there's nothing other than just the arrangement of those basic elements, but the arrangement of those basic elements result in very complex structure. Now, and those complex structures are being studied by scientists, and we have thousands books explaining this process. My point is this, that if I cannot, without the knowledge of physics, cannot explain this complex process, the process behind complex structure, then how come the structure can happen without knowledge, without the mind? That's my point.
Well, there's a very simple answer to that. Your model assumes something like this. First there was knowledge in a supermind. Then there were these properties of substance. And then there was knowledge of lesser minds, the minds of man, which came along to discover the properties that were there. What I'm just saying is just you clip off the first part. You don't need that first part. In other words, the properties are there independent of the idea that there was a mind to produce them. In other words, your first step is not necessary. The model just saying that there are properties there, and then we come along and we try to understand those properties, and we gain knowledge through investigation. That's a two-step model. You're suggesting a three-step model. In rational thinking, what we do is try to go with the law of parsimony, or what's sometimes called Occam's razor. We accept the explanation that accounts for the data, which is simpler than other explanations. So what I'm saying is that your explanation and my explanation both explain the data. I'll grant you that. But mine is simpler. It requires 2 steps. Yours requires 3 steps. Therefore, we ought not to believe your model. We ought to believe my model. We ought to accept my model. It's a more elegant model. It's a simpler model. It's a more beautiful model. All it requires is these two steps. There are these properties, there are these regularities, there are these patterns in nature, and mankind came along. It's debatable how long ago, but the fossil of Lucy, I think, is about 3.5 million years old. Anyway, let's just say mankind came along 3.5 million years ago, and since that time we've gradually increased our knowledge through investigation of these properties of nature.